Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my puntastic co-hosts. Up first, he knows that there are all these new cards with airbenders and earthbenders, but his favorite is actually just good old Oswald Fiddlebender. It's Matt Morgan.
So, in recent news, the U.S. Mint officially declared that it will not make the penny anymore and will not produce them in the future. To me, this makes no sense.
Honestly, I fully detaching from your joke here. I support the elimination of pennies. It feels like a very useless form of currency to me. So I'm actually kind of entirely here for that. And I'm not able to engage with your joke properly. I apologize, Matt.
Joey, if I wanted to hear all that, I would have said, penny for your thoughts.
Or real quick, I'm going to Venmo you 1 cent so that my monologue there will become justified. All right. Up next, his favorite bending isn't going to be a waterbender or a firebender. It's just going to be plain old Bender from Futurama. It's Dana Roach.
I'm dealing with some family drama here today, so I'm going to try to, move forward. My son's mad at me for ruining his birthday, which is ridiculous because I didn't even remember it was today.
Oh.
So, just going to try to get past it all and move on here.
Good. Yeah, I feel like, Dana, your first committed relationship was really to the bit. So anyway, anyway, guys, Dana, what is it that we're talking about in this week's episode, man?
We're talking about the worst deck building mistakes we've ever made.
Yeah, we are. What are some of the decks that we've played and the horrible lessons we learned the hard way could be a way that you phrase this. And basically, we want everyone out there to learn from our mistakes. Don't fall into the same pitfalls that we experienced when we were going through some of these deck building situations. I'm really looking forward to this one with you guys because even though we've been playing for Magic for a whole long time, we certainly haven't always gotten it right and gotten it perfect on all of our first tries. And I feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of these aren't even deck building mistakes. It's more like deck building habits that we just can't break ourselves of to. Because I've done multiple of these multiple times. So I don't know if it's a mistake so much as a bad habit.
Well, why don't I start with one here that's an easy one? Because I did learn, this is what I learned from. There are plenty of mistakes I make that I repeatedly make. But one early one I made was I was just looking for commanders to brew, and I came wrong. Marique Riberet, I believe is how you pronounce it, from back in Ice Age. And it's just it's a commander in Esper. You can tap to gain control of a creature, and you don't have to untap her. So it's a theft commander. And so I'm like, okay, well, I will build just a deck filled with ways to steal people's creatures. And that will be how I will win games. I will play this deck. I will take people's stuff. I will kill them with that stuff. The problem was...
I know exactly where you're going with this.
It just made every game go really slow. Because unless people had a way to play so much stuff I couldn't take it all with all the theft effects I had, they just didn't play stuff. So it just made a commander game take twice or 3 times as long. And then I also would get in situations where if it was down to me and one person, where I was relying on them to play things to win, then they just wouldn't play stuff. I literally remember a game where we both just scooped because there was no way we were going to get to a win. And so that's something I've been very conscious of ever since then, particularly when I brew decks. I look at it and go, okay, well, if this deck plays out the way I intend it to play out, how is that going to impact the pod, and how is that going to make the pod play? And is it a game I want to be in?
Yeah.
Because that created games I didn't want to be in.
Even if you extrapolate that out to, you were playing that deck a while back, you said, where threats were a little more few and far between.
Yeah.
Even if you do that today, one of the saltiest things that I've noticed, because I have a deck that does a few similar things, my Council of 4 deck. It's not a straight theft deck, but it has a lot of theft elements in there. I've noticed that people, if there's one thing people hate more than you countering their stuff, it's letting them resolve it only to take it from them shortly after and then proceed to beat them with it. That is one of the least favorite things people like, even more so than I would say Joey's graveyard being targeted with a Bajuka Bog. It's that type of salt inducing.
Yeah. No, targeting my graveyard, that's homophobic. That's a hate crime, man. How dare you? But no, Dana, I also tried building Marique Riberet at one point as well, and I had the exact same experience where as soon as she's on the field and ready to do her stuff. Everyone just doesn't play creatures. So Matt, kind of going back to the episode that we had last week, in terms of those last game of the nights where you have a time constraint and you want to get something that's
don't do that
pretty fast. Don't play this one, because this is a removal engine right there in the command zone that will forestall the game because people don't want to play into what you've got going on there. It just freezes a lot of development rather than being proactive. So I've encountered exactly that same thing, Dana, and it is something that I feel like I have to be attentive to going forward as well.
And I'm not saying like that deck can't be fun to play, or like decks like that can't be fun, because like some people like those kind of puzzles. They like dealing with stacks or something. In this particular case, the real lesson was to not make a deck that I myself didn't want to deal with. Maybe some people do want to play that kind of pod, but like I made the pod one I didn't want to be in, and that was really the thing to look forward for me to look at, because different people are going to enjoy different things, whatever. So I don't want to discourage you from trying decks like that, if it's the thing you want to be doing and how you want to spend your time when you're in a game.
But be aware of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I'll go to a lesson of mine here. This one involved Yidris, that Maelstrom 4-color guy, where when you hit someone with Yidris, your spells for the rest of the turn are going to have Cascade. Really cool commander. And my embarrassing lesson on this one was that everyone knows like really powerful versions of Yidris, that all you have to do is get one hit, you cast a single spell, and you'll cascade into some like hypergenesis type of spell that will take over the rest of the game with that single activation. Like one hit is all you need to win the game. I did not build that version of deck, and in my head I therefore said, well, it's not that Yidris deck. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't still a gross piece of crap. Like it was still a really I basically
a gross piece of crap. That's a new term that I'm going to use when we start describing decks.
Matt, I like, my family is also part of my meta. I play Magic against my folks. I played this deck against my mom, and I fully thought that I was not getting invited back to Thanksgiving. Like it was embarrassingly just like, what I did was I built Yidris as a Voltron deck, and I was like, oh, this is more restrained, right? It was still a problem. It was still very much a problem. It was still, the chess clock is entirely being taken up by me, and it was still way too powerful for what everyone else was doing. It was embarrassing, egg on my face. I look back on that, I have a whole lot of regret, and my lesson here is just that just because you held back in one way doesn't mean that you held back in the most important ways, and just because it's not technically that deck doesn't mean it's like going to be just fine in every case. You still have to be attentive to the proper place to play it. So that is a lesson I learned the hard way, man.
Well, and that's something we've talked about a couple times on the podcast too. I know, Dana, you and I had a conversation a while back where if you are going to play a commander that like typically can be that deck, like I know that we all went to Kansas City and it was the Prime Speaker Vanifar like era when everybody's like, oh, it's not that Prime Speaker Vanifar deck. But then it turns out to be that even if you aren't building those, your first few plays of the game have to reassure the rest of your pod that like it actually isn't that. Because I know I had the Sultai Muldrotha of the Gravetide deck, which was all about recurring things. And I said, like, I promise folks, this isn't that Muldrotha deck. And so I had to make sure my first few plays were like Implement of Ferocity and other like really bad cards are specific to what I was actually trying to do, just to like reassure your pod mates. Yeah, this isn't, and I swear because I'm showing it to you first thing in the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Spore Frog in this deck. There's no Grave or Fleshwreck Marauder in this deck. Whatever, sure.
Yeah, because there are some of those commanders that have that reputation of just like, I know this can be gross, so there is a little bit of like hesitation on everyone else's part when they see it, which is justifiable. Mm-hmm. But even for us being the pilots, like sometimes we can trick ourselves into not being entirely aware. Like we think that we've restrained it, and we have restrained it in one way, but that doesn't mean that we've restrained it in the most relevant ways. And so that's kind of my lesson out there for everybody is like, watch out. You know, you might build a deck that is not that Yidris deck or that Kenrith deck or whatever, but it still could be pretty darn gross compared to what everyone else is doing. Even if you've already shown some restraint, there could be more that needs to be applied. It is possible. So that's a thing to pay attention to.
And you also kind of need to be aware too of like sometimes a certain commander, like it's just not worth trying to not make that deck because no matter what you do, like you're still not gonna be able to convince people otherwise. Yeah. It's sometimes you just have to cut your losses with commanders like that. I mean, Narset Enlightened Master is probably in my mind, the biggest offender of this. Like sometimes it's not even worth it to try and avoid that building that deck.
Mono Blue Urza. I've seen like quite a few like Mono Blue Urza decks that are on a budget, and like you can still build a really good Urza deck.
Well, our friend, one of our friends of the podcast, has a Mono Blue Urza Gumball deck. Yeah. It still can do some dirty things, and so like sometimes it's the commander's just so egregious. I feel bad for telling people don't try to build a commander. but also, man, it's just not worth that effort of like, can I neuter this thing enough to not make it busted?
At the very least, it's stuff to be very attentive to when you're going forward. It's something to make sure you've got in the back of your mind. Learn from us. Learn from our mistakes, people.
Yes, do.
Yeah.
All right. We just shouted out a friend of the show there, Lenny Woolley. Shout out to you. But also, we've got even more shout outs to do before we get on to the rest of the episode. So, guys, let's get that done real quick.
We are excited to be teamed with Dragon Shield, the only maker of a magic product to send their sleeves into space. If their sleeves will keep a card safe up in the stratosphere, it can keep yours safe at the table when Rick knocks over his Diet Sprite. Rick, he's the worst.
Dang it, Rick.
If it's good enough for space, it's good enough for you.
You know, how can you argue against that logic, right?
Also, fun update, we've got EDHREC games. If you remember Spellify, the magic card guessing game, edhrec.com/games/Spellify is where you're going to find that. But now there's actually also more. For instance, if you like crosswords but make it magic, last Friday on the 14th, edhrec.com/games/crossword is a great space where you can find that we revealed a whole new shindig for you to test your magic knowledge. There's new 11 by 11 puzzles going to happen every Friday. So once again, check out edhrec.com/games for even more magic entertainment.
And if you'd like to support the show, there's a lot of different ways you can do that. The biggest one is just making sure you're subscribed on YouTube and subscribed on your local podcast app, liking these videos. Just a nice free way to do that, which with the ever-changing YouTube algorithms out there, make sure you're subscribed. It just helps us more than you know. But also, if you are so moved, you can also head over to patreon.com/EDHRECast, where you can get yourself a little something in return for supporting us over on Patreon, whether you want to join our Patreon-exclusive Discord. And there's even one very special tier where we just give a shout out to a fan just for supporting us over on Patreon. So this week, we're going to give a very special shout out to Daryl Woolheiser, who didn't pull the wool over his eyes, and definitely went over to patreon.com/EDHRECast and support us over there. So Daryl, thank you so much for your support. We truly couldn't do this without you and the rest of our patrons.
Alrighty, guys, let's get back into our show here, talking about our deck building mistakes. Dana shared one, I shared one. Matt, I think now it's your turn. What is one of those worst deck building mistakes that you've run into, and what lessons, hopefully, can we learn from it?
Well, I mean, I mentioned bad habits in the intro, and this one is definitely a habit of mine. But it's a lot of times I will build out a deck and I'll put it together in paper more often than not until I realized I was trying to be a little too specific with what I was trying to do, and I had just zero contingency plans. The best way I can kind of narrate this is I will fall in love with a card or a specific synergy between two cards, and I'll build a whole deck around those. But the problem is, those are only two cards in 97 other cards in the 99. And it kind of makes this deck unreliable. So a lot of times my pilot game with a new deck goes terribly because I make this like mistake so many times. I know one deck that was kind of emblematic of me trying to be too cute and too specific with how I wanted to win was my Glissa the Trader deck. I know, Dana, that was a deck you and I had, and yours was significantly more successful in just operating as a deck than mine was, because I wanted to do Eldrazi colorless things with artifact colorless things, and it was a mess. And so I need to really fix this habit, and I've gotten better about it. But recently, like, I did have Noctis Prince of Lucis, who I really wanted to win because I had like some Lotus Petal Solemnity combo loop, because my commander puts artifacts back into play with these finality counters, and then there's Aetherflux Reservoir, and like it just got too specific because it needed like 10 things to actually win the game. So it still happens now and then for me, but I need to be better about not conceptualizing entire decks around one or two very specific cards with no redundancy if possible.
So the thing that like you wind up having the idea, but it's a real narrow idea and maybe even too narrow for a deck to support. Sure, I can see that.
I almost kind of wonder, Dana, if that's an issue that you run into because you tend to build your decks in also a very hyper-specific, hipster-ish kind of way. If there are ways that you found around that potential problem, or is that specificity not located too far into the 99 the way that you're describing, Matt? I'm just kind of curious, because there is sort of like a relationship between the way that the things that you're describing, Matt, feel like they might be echoed in some parts of like other deck building that we've experienced. I'm just kind of curious how we've each navigated problems like that.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends. Usually it's not specific cards. In my case, it's like an idea, like it's like a larger concept. So I want to, do as many things as I can with modular. So like there's quite a few cards in the deck that let me like interact with it.
It's broader.
So it's a little bit broader. Okay. But it just doesn't work sometimes too, right? Sometimes you like put the deck together and in for whatever reason, the way it's playing out, it's not consistent enough. It's not a strong, like you're doing a lot of things to do the effect that, you know, someone's Mardu commander just does on the commander. Like it's just not enough either. So like you run into problems sometimes for sure too. Yeah. I think that's the downside of brewing that way around an idea is you sometimes find it just idea doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like I'm a very like commander forward person or commander centric builder. So I don't run into this nearly as often as it sounds like you guys do, but I can see that being like such a big pitfall is like it seems like the scope is what you're describing is like having a broader concept, even if it is a specific like type of strategy or synergy, there is still like it can apply to more than just a small number of cards in the 99. Whereas Matt, what you're describing, like that narrow focus is the thing that keeps tripping up. So if folks are, you know, a bit more commander agnostic in their builds, this is definitely a really good thing to keep in mind.
Well, and something that I think Wizards has gotten good about with, you know, the whole accelerated release calendar of all these new sets and new cards and everything, even if you're trying to get, you know, a unsupported archetype done, there's usually enough within like supporting commander precon, stuff like that like you don't have the team or energy problem necessarily anymore, which for folks that were, you know, playing back in like Kaladesh era, it was really hard to build a team or energy deck. So even though it was the flagship and kind of scourge of standard at the time, you couldn't really build that deck in paper in Commander because there was only like 15 cards that cared about energy, and there was just no way of replicating that because it was such a self-contained mechanic. That has changed over the years, and we finally got some more support so you can kind of do energy in whatever color combination you want to do it in. But for a while there, it was really hard. And so it's kind of the team or energy problem, just like I have at the core of my deck building passions where I want to do something just so hyper specific that I need to at least find other ways to incorporate that idea into a deck that functions a little bit better. And I've gotten better, but it also just forced me to get better about researching and digging for new cards. That is one thing, at least, that I have long-term benefit from this problem. And I've been able to research and build more cohesive decks and find ways to get some sort of redundancy, even though it isn't the specific word for word kind of functionality that like a certain card synergy that I like is.
Well, Matt, redundancy is a pretty interesting point there that you bring up. You're mentioning it in terms of like these hyper-specific synergies that were in your deck that were very difficult cards to replace. So if the entire strategy, like those things are the fulcrum of it, you need those cards for the strategy to work at all. And then finding those cards in the first place is tough. But also if those cards get nuked, if you don't have access to those things anymore, then that can also be tough to make the game plan go forward. That redundancy is also a really relevant point, but not even just for those hyper-specific strategies. I noticed this, and this is another lesson for me, in terms of like my removal suite and sometimes even my draw suite. Dana, you're a big fan of like the Knight's Whisper type of effects where you get a quick cash-in for a couple of cards here. I also love those cards. And I learned to love them because I had so many in a lot of my early drafts of like, let's say my Aristocrats decks, I had so many of just the Grim Haruspex style draw where like a creature dies and I'll draw a card, or I think Murderous Rider or Midnight Reaper, or it's one of those. I can never remember which one is which, but it's another card that when your creatures die, you'll draw a card for it. Fantastic. In my early editions of those types of decks, I would only play the death draw, and I wouldn't play the I have no board state and yet this will still draw me cards type of draw. And that was a mistake. So like having the redundancy, but also the diversity within there, so that you're not relying upon just a single version of a board state in order for your cards to progress. That felt pretty darn important to me, in the same way that like having removal that can exile things in addition to removal that destroys stuff, having slight diversity there and having a slight diversity of those effects helps with the redundancy thing as well. And that was another lesson that I had to learn pretty quickly in order for my decks to succeed a little bit better.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I still like Harmonize in green. It doesn't care what's happening on the board. It doesn't care about any specifics at all. It draws you 3 cards. It's really nice having one of those in a green deck. I don't want 3 of them or 5 of them probably that like don't scale up. But man, there are a lot of times when I'll draw Harmonize, be like, I get to draw 3 cards right now. Aristocrat Expertise wouldn't get me to where I want to go, but Harmonize gets me to where Aristocrat Expertise is really good, right? Like, so yeah, having that diversity in there, I think is really, really useful.
Like if all of your green draw spells always require you to already have a creature in play in order for those draw spells to be effective, you are in some ways hamstringing yourself.
Right.
Or like if you're only playing blue spells that are like pay X mana to draw X cards, yeah, those cards are good, but it requires you to be at a certain point for them to actually get up off the ground. Or I like accidentally swung the other way a little bit too hard, where I wasn't playing as many of the Grim Horror Spexy type of stuff in some of my black decks that weren't super aristocratsy, and I was only playing those pay life to draw type of effects, which those are perfectly efficient cards, except it made my life total plummet really fast. So I learned very quickly to have not just multiple versions of those cards, but also them for each to vary. That way the diversity sort of helped reinforce the redundancy there so that I could avoid those hyper-specific pitfalls that we were just describing.
Sure.
It helped a whole lot to make sure that I can have a variety of things to play depending on different types of board states that I might accidentally end up with during the course of a game.
Yeah, those are all really good points, and I'm glad we're able to like get this conversation out in the air, because I do feel like there's a lot that our listeners can learn. Well, but there's also something else I know our listeners could learn from, which is getting into challenge stats, because there's a bunch of data out there, as Joey loves to say. We don't always agree with it. So why don't we take a quick break, everybody? Get into challenge stats after that.
Yeah, let's go. So I've got a question for all the gamers out there. Are you seriously going to miss out on Alienware's biggest gaming sale of the year? I mean, these are Black Friday prices we're talking about, so it's not just another sale. I took a look, and this is some pretty big bang for your buck. You know, it's Alienware, with some of the most advanced engineering out there, with systems at the top of reviewers' lists. And what about a gift for yourself? Gift yourself a new Alienware 16 Area 51 gaming laptop. I mean, this thing's got performance at the absolute next level with Intel Core Ultra processors. And even better, you can get it during Black Friday. Plus, you can save on all kinds of displays and accessories like the Alienware 27 4K QD OLED gaming monitor for ultimate visual fidelity. These really are incredible deals on PCs with otherworldly performance, so I'd visit alienware.com/deals soon and grab what you can before their biggest sale of the year goes dark. This episode is brought to you by Archidekt, the very best Commander deck building website. We house all of our decks on Archidekt, which you can find linked in all of our episodes, or go to archidekt.com/EDHRECast. And by now, you've probably heard of my favorite feature on Archidekt, dragging and dropping directly from Scryfall or EDHREC right into your deck list, saving you tons of time on typing out your card choices when you're updating your list. And you probably also know that Archidekt's playtester is the very best in the biz, smoothly starting each new turn with a swift draw and untap, easily grouping and tapping things en masse if you need it, making searches and scries super simple, proliferating a bunch of counters with just one click of a button, and more. But did you also know about its playtester logs feature? Archidekt can track stats during your playtests, noting such data as your number of cards drawn each turn or number of mana producers played each turn, so you can see how often you're hitting your land drops or how many extra cards that you draw, and on what turns you're most likely to start drawing extra cards. I just playtested a +1 counters deck to see how much total power it could accrue on the field, and Archidekt tracked for me that I got up to 48 power by turn 6. Such easy access to a detailed recap of your playtests can help you get in tune with how your deck really works, or help you locate its weak spots, and all those little edges and extra bits of knowledge could make all the difference to make you more successful at your next game night. Check out our decks at archidekt.com/EDHRECast, that's archidekt.com/EDHRECast, and thanks again to Archidekt for constantly innovating and for sponsoring the show. Alrighty, getting things kicked off here in Challenge the Stats, our listener challenge this week comes from Moj, who brings up an excellent synergy for all of you Caesareal Genesis Shepherd players out there. Caesareal is the new-ish Edge of Eternity's Jund commander. It is a 5-mana 2/5 flyer who lets you play lands from your graveyard, and whenever you sacrifice another non-token permanent on your turn, it buffs up one of your creatures equal to Caesareal's power. You loop a couple of fetch lands, and you're going to make something really super buff. It's a very interesting deck. Moj here points out that Gao Feral Youth is only in about 70-ish of the 4,200 Caesareal decks that are currently in the EDHREC database. Gao is a 2-mana red creature who gets a +1 counter on him whenever he attacks, and also says that at the end of your turn, if a card left your graveyard this turn, Gao will deal damage equal to its power to each opponent. Cesaril lets you play lands from your graveyard. So boom, a card will have left the graveyard that turn. Trigger is going to happen for Gao. And Cesaril pumps up Gao with each of those sacrifices to then let you deal a bunch of damage when that trigger finally resolves. This is a synergy made in heaven. Thank you, Moj, for pointing it out. This definitely deserves to see more play in that deck. Love this challenge.
My challenge this week is for the card Peter Parker's Camera, which is in just 11,000 decks, compared to Stronic Resonator, which is in just under 200,000. And they both do the exact same thing. You can spend 2 mana and tap them to copy a triggered ability you control, and you can choose new targets for the copy. The difference is Peter Parker's Camera costs 1 less to cast, but it has 3 counters on it, and each use of the camera uses up a counter. First of all, Peter Parker's Camera is significantly cheaper. It's under $1 versus Resonator, which is closing in on $5 nowadays.
Wow.
So it's actually a budget version of that card. Casting it for 1 less makes it way easier to use that ability the first turn you cast it. And quite frankly, when you are copying triggered abilities, if they're good enough for you to want to copy, copying them 3 times is probably good enough. It's going to get you where you need to go. This is one of those situations where I would say 3 uses on the card is probably more uses than you will need or ever get with this kind of an effect. And saving 1 mana to cast it is going to be relevant more often than wanting to use it a 4th or a 5th or a 6th time.
Cards that copy triggered abilities are always just bangers, to be honest. If I may, Dana, a quick yes and to your challenge there. The Camera is a pretty new card, so of course the raw numbers are going to be lower than the Resonator, because that card has been around longer. But if we look at the percentages, that's going to show us a really actionable difference in the data here. Strionic shows up in 2.6% of all eligible decks in the database, whereas Peter Parker's Camera is showing up in under 1% of all decks that have been made or updated since that Spider-Man set came out. So not just the raw numbers, but the percentages, that's going to show us a difference in terms of how much attention people are paying to these.
Yes, right.
But yeah, I do agree it's a good card. That is possibly worth paying more attention to, because like saving that 1 mana might make the difference more often than the number of counters that are on it. Not to mention that it can also copy activated abilities too. So even though it's weird to see Peter Parker's Camera on the battlefield, even though that's still weird to me, there are some efficiencies definitely worth acknowledging here. So yeah, good to point out.
Yeah, I just, again, my brain struggles to wrap around those types of cards. Again, New York City in the background. It's weird for sure. I'll wrap us up real quick with my challenge. So this actually is another one of those Spider-Man cards. So Gwen Stacy, which flips into Ghost Spider, is a commander that's all about casting a bunch of things from exile. It's a pretty common archetype nowadays with getting you rewards for it. We've seen it all over the place. And a card that I can't help but still love no matter what, and it's not getting enough love pretty much anywhere, is the card Embrace the Unknown. It is 2 and a red for a source that says exile the top 2 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So it is next turn, not the end of this turn. Very, very important. But it also importantly has Retrace, which means you can cast it from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to its other costs. So if you need a nice, steady way of repeatable card advantage for any of these type of play from exile decks, Embrace the Unknown is just absolutely one of my favorite ways to have a steady source of card draw no matter what you're doing. In Gwen Stacy specifically, it's only being played in about 15% of decks, which is well under a lot of other impulse type of draw effects that are one-shot effects. So if you want to be able to do this every single turn and constantly fuel Gwen Stacy, this is absolutely a card you want to be including in there. Another good spot for this might be one of the new Firelord Zuko decks. That's something that's coming out in Avatar Last Airbender. It's all about casting spells from exile as well, and it's only getting played in 10% of decks so far. So if you want a just great source of card advantage, repeatable every turn, rewards you for getting things into exile and playing them, Embrace the Unknown is just absolutely fantastic. It's only in 17,000 decks total, which seems like a lot, but it's really not when you can look at a lot of its competitors. So Embrace the Unknown, folks. Embrace the unknown, I guess I would say. That's how I should say, yeah.
Also, Firelord Zuko giving you rewards when you play stuff that came back from exile. When Zuko comes back from exile. Some of these jokes, they do be landing on me, I just gotta say.
Well, Challenge of Stats is brought to you by Cardsphere, the best way to turn your unplayed cards into played cards. I took a bunch of long road trips this fall, and every time I came home, I had 3 or 4 envelopes of cards waiting for me that got sent to me through someone on Cardsphere. That's just the best way to come back from a trip, is to find magic cards waiting for you. Just mail it to cards you're not using and use your credit to get cards you do want. Go to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast to get started today.
All right, guys, back to talking about our worst deck building mistakes. I want to talk about one that I honestly encountered the most whenever I update precons. A pretty common thing that you see in precons are going to be basically a lot of clunky spells, especially in the removal category. Precons still sometimes contain cards like Utter End and Return to Dust, which are 4-mana exile stuff that I just think the game, for the most part, when you're optimizing or making a deck more efficient, are not usually going to survive the cut. But those are still in precons decently often. And when you're upgrading, I feel like there's this instinct to just yoink some of those out because you know them to be a little bit less efficient than what you're after. But then you do that thing where you forget to replace them with literally any other removal spell. So then you've just reduced the number of removal spells that are in the deck overall. And even if those cards were not your favorite, they were still fulfilling a function that the deck does in fact need. This is a mistake that I've made a couple of times, especially when I'm upgrading precons, where I forget to do the swap of like, all right, cool, I cut a draw spell, I need to replace it with another form of card advantage, or I cut a removal spell, I should probably replace that with a removal spell. I forget to do a swap across the same category, and I just look at it in terms of like efficiency of like mana cost or things like that, and that often leads to my upgrades not necessarily helping the deck survive as a thriving organism, so to speak. So that's a thing that I wanted to call out real quick here. When you're making cuts, make sure that you're paying attention to what you cut and then what's going in there, and that it probably should share some version of the same category if the ratios of the deck are very good.
Yeah, I mean, this can take a ton of different forms in decks, too. There will be the 2-mana spell you have on your deck that does thing A, and then a 3-mana version of it will come out that will do thing A and thing B and gain you 2 life or something, right? And you're like, well, the 2 life gain one is a little bit better, so like I'll pay 1 more mana. Well, that's not a big deal. And then you do that in the next set, and the next set, and the next set, and you've changed the mana value of your deck by replacing 14 cards that cost 2 mana with 14 cards that cost 3 mana, and your deck just flows differently. Like there's a lot of different forms that can take, and it's a really easy mistake to make that I guarantee we've all done at some point, where whatever the change is gets compounded over some amount of time and just change how the deck works.
Yeah, cutting cards and messing up the ratios is something I've done with a couple decks over the course of my years. It's definitely like you take something out that is old and reliable to put in something new and exciting and big and splashy. If you do that enough times, eventually your card just stops, or your deck stops functioning altogether. It's really, really frustrating. Like you play this and suddenly you don't realize it, and it's, oh man, this deck just like doesn't work anymore. And you have to kind of go back and reevaluate and kind of undo 5 or 6 steps that you took to get to where you are now.
Yeah, those little erosions. If folks want to check out, we have a video on the channel that came out very recently about times where things that you think are upgrades might actually be downgrades. So I really recommend checking that one out. And there's a couple of these types of issues that we run into. But yeah, those little like small adjustments that you don't notice on a card for card basis, but your deck does notice over time as a whole. So be very attentive to those types of things and make sure that you keep your ratios intact and your mana curve. Make sure it's all just little stuff that you're paying extra attention to, because it could go a really long way. What's another lesson that you guys have?
Yeah, so I have one here. It was a lesson I learned. The problem was I didn't translate it to a different deck. So I have a budget elf ball deck I have that I use, super cheap, and I can play against a bracket 2 deck if I don't have anything else. And I can, if there's a new player on, I can just like give them the deck if they want to learn how to play Magic. And I'm not out very much because it's a bunch of cheap elves basically, and a few overruns for win conditions. Play testing that deck, one of the problems I noticed was, well, early on, all I have is a bunch of 1/1 elves as blockers, and I'm going to lose them in any kind of trade situation, but I don't really want to lose them because I want to get to this mass amount of elves. So I just have to take hits, and maybe I'll get to the point where like I can still turn the corner, but maybe I won't. And if I have to start blocking, then I'm never going to get back ahead. I recently built a deck using a bunch of equipment that comes into play attached to creatures, germs, or the 4 Mirrodin creatures, or the job select heroes from Final Fantasy. The same thing occurs there, because those are all 0/0 or 0/1 or 1/1 creatures attached to fairly bad pieces of equipment that make them into 1/2s or 2/1s or something. I have no blockers in that particular deck, and I have to take shots to the face until I get to the point where I can turn that corner. I knew that was an issue for that elf deck, but I didn't realize it was an issue for this deck, despite the fact that in the same situation, a bunch of small creatures. I should have seen that translate over and didn't. I've since compensated by putting some fogs in the deck, whatever. Like, I've fixed the problem, but I should have caught it right away because I've seen it before. I just like didn't make that connection between this deck with tiny creatures was probably going to be the same as this deck with tiny creatures.
Because they do feel so different. It really does feel as though like Elf Ball is going to be a completely different arena than Equipment. It doesn't feel like those lessons would necessarily translate. But yeah, they do. So I like that your mistake here that you're talking about is like not having learned the lesson. That's just the lesson to learn here is to learn the lesson. It's just a very funny a little bit of snake eating its own tail here.
I guess that actually will be like your lessons can apply to other decks versus a really specific one situation you learned it. And that seems obvious, but I missed it in this case.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think one lesson that I've learned is kind of one of those evergreen lessons where I learned it from one specific experience, but it applies to every single deck is there was a time that I was so afraid of losing because of somebody just overrunning me that I put way too much interaction in the early stages of every single deck. And I know Joey...
Hyper-defensive. Yeah,
hyper defensive, hyper reactive. But I remember, like, depending on what color that takes, like, it's fine if you have a bunch of single target kill spells. But it's not okay if that takes the form of a bunch of board wipes or a bunch of counter spells that frustrates your friends. Because I remember, Joey, you and I had a conversation. You're like, wait, you said only 10 counter spells? What do you mean only?
Yeah, that was a wild sentence.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, you said, this deck has only 10 counter spells or only 9 counter spells or whatever it was. And I was just like, wait, what? That was a weird sentence to hear.
That was a wild sentence to have. So I had to reconcile with myself a little bit. I was like, no, the pendulum did swing way too far that one specific way. And so I was playing so hard in the camp of I don't want to lose that I forgot I also have to win. And it's not just about making my friends miserable along the way.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I've also noticed like sometimes you encounter a deck list that has like 7 or 8 board wipes in it, and you're kind of like, whoa, okay, okay.
Yeah.
We do need like a little bit of forward momentum, and this is really going to stall things out a whole lot. It might be effective, but are people going to enjoy it more? And like, are you going to enjoy it more? I don't know if the answer is yes to that all the time when your removal loadout is taking up that much real estate in the deck. A little bit more proactivity could result in things that are a lot more enjoyable over time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'll kind of move to another lesson of mine here, a mistake that I've made. And this is a weird one. I guess it like kind of came to my mind because, Matt, the idea of like playing too much removal will probably sound weird to a lot of folks. A lot of folks out there think that Commander players don't play enough removal. Mm-hmm. So it will probably, like, your issue there that you just mentioned will probably sound a little bit strange. So I think this one will also sound a little bit strange too. That's why it made me think of it. A weird mistake that I've made, and honestly, this might have been a mistake I just made very recently as well, is a deck having a really, really good first showing.
Yeah.
So that now the playgroup thinks that the deck will be fully superpowered in every game going forward. I just built an earthbending deck. I was trying to decide between the new Toph and the new Avatar Kyoshi, and I think I'm leaning towards Kyoshi, and I did very well at game night. And now I'm like, uh-oh. People will think this is always going to be the case when maybe that's not actually true of the deck. Now that they know how it works, they'll be able to like see it coming and answer it a lot better. Did I just kind of shoot myself in the foot there by having a really good first game night with this? Has this happened to you guys?
I don't know if that specific instance of a thing has happened, but I've definitely had situations where like your first impression of this thing takes on an outside or outlandish size compared to like what it really should.
Sure.
You know, I mean, it can go the opposite direction, right? Like the deck has a poor first performance, and in your head you're like, well, this is a trash deck. It was one game, right? Like don't just immediately assume you need to retool the entire brew because it had one bad showing, or you know, you put a card into a deck and you don't draw it for the next 6 or 7 times you play it, and then it comes time to make cuts for the following set, and you're like, well, this card hasn't done anything for me. It's
sure.
like, well, you haven't drawn it yet.
I did that. I did that with a few decks where like I just thought a deck was, or a few cards that I added into a deck. I was like, these are so worthless, but I was like, wait, they're not worthless. I just don't know because I haven't drawn them, and I'm already trying to take them out of decks. That came to a head for a while with me, where I was just churning through cards so fast, making updates, that I never actually got to see half the cards I wanted to because I was cutting cards before I was able to actually cast them.
Yeah, and with the relentless pace of set releases, of course, that has only been an issue that has exacerbated more and more. And so that too could be another huge deck building mistake, is to like not give things time to breathe properly. So that kind of encapsulates both of our points here. Just like I'm basing a lot off of a very big first impression. And then you guys are saying, I haven't even gotten a chance to get a first impression with a bunch of these too. So yeah, make sure that you let the wine breathe when you open it. It's kind of the lesson here. Treat your commander decks like a fine bottle of wine and make sure that it gets some chance to oxidize. And
make sure you don't let, first impressions have too strong of an opinion and make sure you don't let the first showing for any given deck have too strong of an opinion the other way around too. Like if you play a deck and like it doesn't have a great first showing, but you like say things just never came together, you missed land drops. There's certainly lessons to be learned there, but don't let something affect you the other way around too. Don't think this thing is way too powerful because I had one very good opening hand that let you steamroll. On the same side of that, or opposite side of the coin, I guess, don't let one bad showing completely ruin your view of a deck either, just because it was your first showing, and things are always going to be rough. No matter how good of a deck builder you are, you can make mistakes in that process, and just make sure you let things go.
Yeah, this deck didn't have a good first game, so now I've got to go retinker the entire thing and punch up the deck super, super strong. Now I've got to play all the best cards instead because it didn't come together. Having more time to get a proper impression seems wise there, so that you're not then resorting to like tutors and staples and stuff that actually the deck may not need after all. You just didn't get the chance for it to really express itself just yet off of a small number of like even just one game or two games or something like that. Yeah, really good point.
That's why I really like whenever we go to MagicCons together, I really like bringing at least one or two new decks because I know I'm going to at least get in like 3 or 4 games per deck. And so it really gives me a chance to flesh that out. I'm going to play against a few different groups of people too. So I kind of get a good idea for what is that deck's identity now, and then what changes do I need to make. That way it's not based off just one very specific game that could have gone any number of ways wrong.
You got a weekend's worth of games rather than just a game night type of deal. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think Matt might have hinted at this a little bit earlier on, but I've been conscious of lately is making sure I don't get too into old habits. And so here's an example. I would wager all of us probably ran Return to Dust in decks longer than we should have. Back in the early days of EDH, that was a staple. Like if you were playing white, that was one of the removal spells you ran. It was an exile and it could hit 2 targets. That was fantastic. At some point, the game sped up a little bit and there became more options that you could run in white that maybe did the same thing but better. But like I probably defaulted to throwing that into decks or not taking that out of decks for longer than I should have because of that. Like it was a force of you just ran it. You just assumed it was a white staple. And it's something I've been cautious of lately because I was going to brew a white deck recently and I went to like my first instinct was, okay, well, I'll throw Austere Command in here as my board wipe. Like, well, I need to look at this a little bit more closely versus just defaulting to assuming Austere Command is the best fit because it was 10 years ago. And so that's something that I've been very cautious of and I've caught myself doing and I've been vigilant about lately is making sure I'm not just instinctively throwing cards in decks because it was a habit I've developed.
Yeah. Consistently reevaluating those things is a good move. And that's such an interesting example with Austere Command too, because it is still a good card.
Yeah, absolutely.
There just are also so many other board wipes these days that might be slightly more conducive to what you're doing, whether it's the ones that are like, Damnable Verdict, I think it is, where like destroy everything that doesn't have a counter on it. That is going to be very bespoke to a certain type of strategy. I'm a huge fan of Winds of Abandon, which is like path to exiling everybody else's creatures. I like doing that because if I've got a board set and I cast that, you can't block me anymore. And that might help me win the game rather than just reset the game, So like little touches like that might be slightly better for your deck. So yeah, just that consistent, like, let me at the very least reconsider this. Let me reevaluate those things. It could end up having huge benefits later on, and not just resetting to default assumptions is a really good lesson that can be hard to learn.
Well, Joey, I mean, we've got enough time probably for one more lesson that could be learned by our audience. So why don't you wrap us up then with one last talking point?
Yeah, this is another one I'm kind of curious if you guys relate to here. I think another weird one that I've encountered in my deck building is basically, I guess you could say, quote, solving the deck super fast. Making a deck where after even just one game, I have gotten the full experience that I wanted from that deck, and then there's not much further appeal afterwards. I actually made a video about this as well that I called that video completed then yeeted. Like you just play one game of the deck and you're good. And I ran into that with a Tigvar the Bellicose deck, which is a really cool elf where when you tap your elves for mana, it'll buff them up. I think that's a really neat ability. And for playing it one time, I was just like, that's all I needed. That's it. I got it. It's good. And I'm a little bit like, dang, I spent some money on this. I should have just proxied. Because it would have been nice to know that after one game I was actually set, I was content with it. Has that ever been something that you guys have encountered where you build a deck and you're excited to play it, but then as soon as you do one game, you're basically done with the experience and you feel like there's no more to explore? Am I alone here? Am I crazy? Please let me know.
This is definitely one I've ran into before with decks, or where the experience was just going to be different than I thought it was going to be. Like I thought it was going to play one way and it didn't wind up playing that way. And the way it wound up playing was not very fun or not what I wanted to be doing with that deck. So yeah, I've for sure run into that before.
I mean, you can almost get a feel for what kind of commanders and what different decks are going to do that. I every time that I play Brawl, I feel I come across at least two decks that they do one thing and one thing only. And I just don't see the appeal of like playing that significantly. Like I know Lelia the Blade Reforged, I should say. It's the mono red, another cast things from exile type of deck. But they play it with like 4 discover cards in the deck. So they'll discover, like go kind of crank through the deck because it's just 95 lands, 4 discover cards in your commander. So you'll cast one of those discover cards, you'll crank through the deck, you'll find your next discover card, and then you'll exile a ton of cards, and then you're just going to go sideways. It's cool, I guess, but it's super, super linear. It's kind of like the old ad nauseum Marilyn of the Morning Song type of decks where you're just going to pick up your entire deck. You're going to lose a bunch of life for everybody. Sure. It's those types of things. If it's doing just one very specific thing, you can kind of flag those types of decks once you kind of get used to, okay, this reads a certain way. Okay, yep, that is the commander that only does that one thing.
That's just it. I've also built a number of decks that just wound up being solitaire piles, basically. And after one game with them, it was just like, yeah, okay, I did indeed play solitaire. Combos have sometimes felt that way to me. I mentioned the EDHRECast deck that I built a bit ago. That one was a lot of like, I'm doing all the game actions. I built a Keurig deck as well that was just like, cool, my turn is going to take at least 8 minutes, probably longer. And after playing them one time, I was like, pretty sure I've done what it was that this deck was here to do, and I don't know that there will be continual puzzles for me to solve, which is why a lot of my deck building these days has turned a lot more towards variance from turn to turn. And that's a thing that I hope someone out there might hear it and be like, that's happened to me too, to know that you're not alone, because I felt alone. Thank you guys for reinforcing that I'm not alone in this lesson, but it is a weird one to try and observe. When you're trying to figure out why is it that I'm not having as much fun with this as I used to, that can be a hard thing to put your finger on. And sometimes it is just because the decks are able to express themselves so well the first time that there's not going to be as much to explore later. It's a weird problem, but it does sometimes happen.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things like maybe that's the experience you want. Maybe that's a thing that is enjoyable for you, a deck that does play very similarly every single time, and then maybe there isn't a problem. So like to be clear, we're not criticizing decks that play that way. We're just saying if that's not what you're looking for, that can absolutely be a deal breaker for a deck if it does wind up playing in a just super linear fashion.
Yeah. At the very least, those are the types of decks that could accidentally cause you to fall into that area. And if that is an area that you don't want, then being attentive to the types of commanders that could prompt that to occur, or the types of play patterns that could prompt that to occur, that's the type of thing to be aware of here. That, I think, is definitely a lesson to learn. Really good clarification. I appreciate that, Dana. All right, well, guys, we made a whole bunch of mistakes. I'm glad that we're learning. Maybe we haven't learned completely, but I'm glad that we are learning from them. And folks out there, I hope that you can learn from our issues too. We learned the hard way. I hope that you can learn in a slightly more productive way than perhaps the rough experiences, the rough games that we've gone through to figure out some of these. But I mean, confronting them is the only way that we're going to get better, right? So this is a really fun show, you guys.
Absolutely.
With that, listeners, you got to let us know, what are your mistakes? Reveal to the internet, comment, let us know what are the issues that you've run into in deck building and how is it that you overcame those issues. We definitely want to hear from you. With that, though, guys, we're going to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to get in touch with us online, where is it that they can find us all? Matt?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform, Instagram, Blue Sky, whatever, at Mathimus55. That's Mathimus 55. And don't forget, we are proud to team up with the only accessories brand out there that has sent a card to space and back perfectly safe. So make sure to check out Dragon Shield for just the best ways to protect all of your cards out there, whether you're learning lessons from them or not. And use code EDHREC when you buy their stuff online, and make sure you get yourself a nice little discount that way too.
And Dana.
You can find me online at Dana Roach. I'm writing articles for EDHREC, and you can find all of us together at patreon.com/EDHRECast.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz, and you can find the cast online at EDHRECast everywhere on the internets. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights, but until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.